Okay, so hello and welcome everyone to our panel on choosing a grad program or lab, hosted by the Engineering Biology Research Consortium Student and Postdoc Association. I'm Ross. I'm a postdoc in Peter Zanch's group at the University of British Columbia, and I'll be your host for today. So this session, we have a panel assembled here who we'll introduce on the next slide. We have some prepared questions for the panelists to answer. And then at the end, for the last 20-30 minutes or so, we'll allow the people present in the audience to ask questions to us. And we'll stick around to 2:30. This recording is going to be posted on YouTube. So if you're watching this on YouTube, thanks for joining, and definitely check out EBRC's Student and Postdoc Association. Okay, so let's talk about our panelists today. Welcome, everyone. So just left to right here, as presented on the slide, how can each one of you unmute yourself and introduce yourself briefly?
Hi, everyone. I'm Christina Davis. I'm a second-year graduate student within the Shen Lab at the Scripps Research Institute, and I use synthetic biology for natural product discovery.
Hey everyone, I'm Andrew Hunt. I did my PhD at Northwestern University working with Mike Jewett, and my PhD focused on using synthetic biology and specifically cell-free systems to accelerate the pace of therapeutic drug discovery. And I'm sort of in between things at the moment and going to be starting a postdoc at the University of Washington in the Baker Lab in the coming fall.
Hi, everyone. My name is Alan Lee. I did my PhD at Rice University with Ramon Gonzalez. I'm also in the transition mode. I'll be starting a postdoc at MIT under Greg Stephanopoulos' lab. I've done most of my research in metabolic engineering with specific theme on 1-carbon C1 metabolism and industrial biomanufacturing.
Hi, everyone. My name is Ice. Like, that's the long name that I have. I'm not trying to pronounce it. I'm originally from Thailand, and I'm at University of Washington right now. I work in 2 labs, in James Curtis and JC Sajan lab. So the work I'm focusing on is trying to develop the CRISPR activation tools to regulate the gene expression in bacteria. And the goal is to make it portable and usable in different like strains of bacteria. Like, the goal is trying to make it broad host range as much as possible. And we are applying it for like some sort of genetic circuit to make some biosensor and to do metabolic engineering to make some valuable chemicals.
Unmute myself. Cool. So I'm just going to end the screen share now so we can be in a more normal format for this discussion. We'll keep an eye on the chat and feel free to sort of roll in questions as we go through our prepared questions, so that when we get to the Q&A part, if there's not immediately a question, we can go to those in the chat. Okay, so the first question to start off with this panel is, why did you join your current program or lab? And for those of us that are postdocs, I think it would be helpful to talk about both our grad program and lab choice, and then our postdoc program and lab, or it's not really a program usually for postdocs, but why we chose our postdoc lab as well, because I think that there might be some relevant insights from both of those, and that might be helpful to those listening in. So who wants to start first?
I will go first.
All right, go for it.
So I'm in a program called Molecular Engineering and Science, and it's sort of like a multidisciplinary program. So the way the program works is that, like, you have your first year that you can do full rotations in 3 quarters in different labs, and that's the main reason why I joined this program. Because I'm here, I joined UW where I want to like do focus on like this specific kind of research. So like right at the time, I think I want to do metabolic engineering a lot, and I want to do it in bacteria. So I rotated in 3 labs, and it was fully paid in the first year. So like for some of you, if you're applying to the PhD program, you may have seen some requirements that you have to teach, you have to do like different stuff during your first year. It depends on the program. The strong point of the molecular engineering program that applies because you don't have to do TA at least for the first year, so that you can spend most of your time focusing on like what you really want to do in the next 4 years in your research. Yeah, I'll stop at that. I think that's the key thing why you can choose these kind of like modern program or like multidisciplinary program that focus more on like how to choose your research lab properly. And I ended up joining 2 labs that I rotated in. Like I joined 2 labs being co-advised, and 2 out of 3 that I rotated, I joined them.
So you rotated one and then you rotated the other, and then you ended up joining them together somehow. How did that like co-advising choice work for you?
Yeah, so like funny thing is that like when I come here, I want to work with the chemistry PI Jesse Salatan, because I'm originally from organic chemistry, so I go through the chemistry program PIs first, and then I rotate with Jesse, and then I found out that like I want to try to rotate with James Curtis as well, but I didn't know that they work together at the time. When I come and rotate in the first lab, I was like, oh, actually there was one student who was co-advised by these 2 PIs already, and the research are pretty like they can be connected, because like one is focusing on like how to make the tools and the other is how to apply the tools. And then I try to rotate in the other labs because like that's sort of like relevant and interesting at the same time. So I just rotate on the second lab and decided to join both of them. I actually like did the 3rd rotation as well, in order to learn what the next lab, has the resources or like tools or collaborations that I can initiate. And I ended up like, know some of people in the lab and like stay connected. And we have some projects that are still collaborating with the 3rd lab as well in general.
Cool, thanks, Ice. Who wants to go next?
I can go next. I'm a chemical engineer by training, and I've always been interested in energy and renewable energy more specifically. And as a chemical engineer, there aren't that many disciplines that you can kind of do research on. I was more interested in like liquid fuels and stuff like that, but I didn't want to go to petrochemical type of research. So that's how I started working in the field of metabolic engineering microbes to sustainably generate fuels and chemicals. Back when I did my undergrad in UCLA, and there was a professor that was really famous in the field. And that's kind of how I started doing research in metabolic engineering. And I was like fascinated by this field, and I wanted to continue doing that during my PhD. And but in terms of like searching different schools, I didn't really look into much of like the program itself or even like the faculty in the program, which I kind of regret doing that, because I should have done better searching and better like better choice for which schools to apply. But I was kind of lucky to get accepted to Rice, and Ramon is someone who's specifically working in that field. So I didn't really have much other options. I just it was pretty natural for me to join Ramon's lab at Rice. Typically, a chemical engineering program doesn't really involve rotation, so I was just getting into the research like right away after joining. And for postdoc, it was pretty similar. I wanted to continue in the theme of sustainable biomanufacturing, bioconversion. More on the industry side rather than like therapeutics and healthcare. So yeah, that was pretty natural transition from Ramon's lab to Greg's lab, which, been like the pioneer in this field for a very long time.
Hey, thanks, Alan. Andrew or Christina?
I can follow up on that. So yeah, I was also a chemical engineer by training. I did my undergraduate in chemical engineering, and when I was applying to grad schools, I mostly focused on chemical engineering programs. Although I think much like Alan, I wasn't exactly sure what I didn't know exactly what I was getting into, I think, and I didn't know what exactly I wanted to do, which I think is really hard at the step of applying to grad schools. Most of the programs I applied to accepted you to the program, and then you figured out your lab once you got there. And I think that's mostly the case for the majority of chemical engineering programs, at least. I ended up joining Northwestern's program, which is a chemical and biological engineering program, which I did some research on places when I applied and tried to find professors whose research I found interesting. And Northwestern had fairly recently started to really push into the area of synthetic biology. And I became really excited about that area when I started applying. And once I was accepted and visited, that really cemented my interest in working in that particular area. So I actually didn't apply to all that many programs that had that as much. But I really ended up liking Northwestern. I found that there was multiple potential advisors that I felt like their research was interesting, who I felt like I could work for. I really liked all of the people that I met there. I felt like being there, I would be supported, not just as a student, but encouraged to grow and develop professionally. So I really liked that and ended up joining Mike Jewett's lab for a lot of the same reasons. I liked Mike, I liked the research, and I really liked the people in his lab. I felt like it was going to be a good place for me to develop as a scientist and grow as a person. And so, and just continuing that theme after finishing my PhD, I was trying to decide what I was interested in doing next. I was interested in gaining some computational experience and getting more into protein engineering and design specifically. And David Baker's lab is a great place for that. And again, I sort of always picked places where I felt like I would do well and would be supported in my efforts to grow as a scientist and learn new skills and do things that I think are important. So I think that sums up my choices there.
I'll just add on a little bit to what everyone else is already outlining, which I think are really all great points. For me, my main driver and where I am now is my PI. So that was kind of my main decision in coming to Scripps Research was I wanted to join the Shen Lab, and I applied to a lot of programs all over. I focused on biosensor development previously, but for graduate school, I kind of wanted to focus on application of synthetic biology toolkits. And so in my interview process at Scripps Research, I interacted with my PI now, Ben Shen, and in that process, he's just a really inspiring and passionate person. And so through our just interactions in my interview weekend, I decided that this was the lab for me. And so from there, I kind of just made the decision that this was the program I wanted to join, and Ben's lab was the lab that I could see myself in for my PhD. And we can get into like the specifics of that later in the panel.
Great, thanks. And I'll just round this off. When I applied, I was interested in a lot of things. I think I was most interested in synthetic biology, but I was also interested in like neural engineering and some other fields, systems biology, and learning those kind of computational approaches to study cells. And so I kind of looked for programs that had a mix of people from these different spaces so that I would be able to maybe rotate with those labs or check them out and see what I actually liked. And so that helped me to kind of decide what programs to apply to in the first place. And then I ended up getting into MIT, and I was really excited about Ron Weiss's lab there, which I ended up joining because they did mammalian synthetic biology, and there were some connections to interesting applications that he was working on that I thought would be cool, and that kind of related to some work that I had done in undergrad / like things that I had been interested in undergrad but I hadn't necessarily worked on. And so once I like met with him on the interview weekend, I was like, oh, this helped like focus a lot my interests, and that helped pull me to MIT. And then I rotated in that lab first and checked out some other labs too, but I was pretty into the research right away. As far as my postdoc choice, so I did a lot of very like tool development type work in my grad school, and I wanted to do more application focused work for my postdoc. And so I ended up joining Peter Zanch's group, which is in Canada. and does like is trying to work up basically stem cell derived therapies. And I'd been thinking about cell therapies as a really nice application area for mammalian synthetic biology, but sort of regenerative medicine driven cell therapies is sort of actually potentially a better application in that stem cells are much more engineerable than primary cells that you can get from patients. So I thought it was a good area to sort of bring these tools to, with a lot of potential still downstream applications. So yeah, the grad choice was in part driven by the lab, but also just kind of the availability of options for labs that I was interested in. And postdoc was very directed towards like the lab and the type of research I wanted to get into. Cool. So maybe we can talk a little bit about the specific qualities of a lab or program. We mentioned a few things already about, you know, like some aspects of TAing or not that you might have to do as part of your program, or certain like qualities of a professor that you might want to work for. But maybe we can dive into this a little bit. Were there any particular things that you were looking for in a program or supervisor beyond what we've talked about so far?
Yeah, I'm happy to start. I think there was a lot of things. It's definitely an overwhelming process. You're like trying to make a decision on fairly limited information, but I think that going into it, I really wanted to be excited about the science. So that was a big driver for me, is trying to find projects that I thought were both interesting and impactful. And so that was a big driver for me. And then as I mentioned, a big driving force was trying to find a place that I felt like was really going to support me. And graduate school is very much about developing yourself as a scientist and just growing, and trying to find an environment that is good for that is important. And I think that was the biggest thing I was trying to look for. So trying to find out all the types of programs that the particular grad program puts on to support professional development of students. Like, what type of things can you get involved in at the university aside from just doing research? Because there's a lot more to growing as a scientist than just like going into lab or sitting at your computer and coding. And so that was a big thing that I looked for. And the other thing was people, definitely. I think that was something I wasn't expecting it to play as big a role maybe as it ended up playing. And that was some advice that I got when I was looking at schools, was to really pay attention to the people that you interact with, because the people you end up in lab with are the people you're going to spend the next 4 to 6 years with every day, and will have a really big impact on your development. And you know, they'll be the people who are training you and supporting you as you're complaining when your experiments fail, and all of those types of things. So I think that was something that I really ended up thinking a lot about. So the people that I got along the best with on my interview weekend, and the grad students I met on my interview weekends, really helped shape my decision, and I think ended up being really critical to me having the graduate experience that I did.
I can add on. So for me, for my program specifically, what I really liked about it is you don't have to, or you don't really have an option to TA at all, because we don't have undergrads at my institute. So I like that I wouldn't have a TA requirement. You can TA graduate classes for like a stipend increase, which is nice. Some students though are interested in TAing because they want to be professors in their next step. So that's not the best fit for everybody. I also liked with my program now, I wanted to focus on getting my classes done as quickly as possible. So we do 6 classes and they're all done in year 1, which I also enjoyed about my program. Yeah, those are kind of the program specific items that I really liked compared to some of the other programs I was looking at. Oh, and then for my lab, I'm in a postdoc heavy lab. So we have 3 graduate students to around 10 to 15 postdocs usually. This is something I was really interested in because it's nice. I wanted to have a lot of hands-on expertise as I'm in a natural products lab now compared to, even though I'm a synthetic biologist in training, I'm kind of switching over fields a little bit. And so being able to have a lot of expertise in the lab that I could rely on and really try to gain as much knowledge as possible from was really valuable to me. And it's something I've really grown to appreciate the longer I'm in graduate school, being able to have those resources, just because I have a more senior PI. So he's very busy. So it's nice to have individuals within the lab that can assist with some of my experiments.
I would like to jump in and you know, support Christina's like point about like not having to TA. So I mean, again, one of the big reasons that I joined the program is that you don't have to TA in the first year. So the con about that is that like molecular engineering doesn't have undergrad program as well, but we are still fortunate enough that like we would join the lab that our PI might be from another department, and then we can sort of TA for the other department as well. But there's no requirement for the MO student to like TA at all. So if you don't like to TA, then you can just say no. If you want to TA, then you can sort of like, you know, line up for it. So that was like a flexibility. In terms of PI, I want to like mention again that I am co-advised. So the things I was looking for my PIs is that I need some independence to a certain extent, that like, you know, I can like build up the work with my thought process, something like that, so that I feel like I am like developing the work from almost ground zero and like try to make it happens. So the good things about having two PIs is that like you're not gonna have like a very like big armrest with your PI, because like if it's just two person, then it's gonna be going around over and over whether like which approach would be better. By having the third person, you can sort of like come to the compromise situation where like, well, I think that was good, but that thing is also good. So let's just try to come up with a new thing. So we don't feel like, well, that's my idea is bad, or like my PI idea doesn't make any sense. We come to the common ground where everything sort of like makes sense and get to the same sort of like the same goal. So I think that's what I like about like having not just one PI. And my two PIs are sort of like think differently as well. One of them is a chemist. The other one is a chemical engineer. So like having two different thoughts into the thought process is pretty cool.
Yeah, in terms of the program, I think chemical engineering programs are pretty standard everywhere. So I don't think there's anything special about Rice chemical engineering. But I know those of you who are still considering which school to apply, Rice has a similar program as what I just mentioned called Synthetic Systems and Physical Biology, SSPB. I think that's pretty special, and you have flexibility to go to different labs from different departments. And I met many people who really enjoy in that program. In terms of choosing PI, I would like to echo what Andrew said. I think, at least to me personally, the most important aspect was the topic of the research, whether it really excites you and the topic that you're really passionate about. I think that's really the driver for you to, you know, continue going to the lab and, you know, proactively look for different resources and, you know, spend your time, you know, thinking about it. And I think that's like the gist of grad school. Like for different labs have different environment, and different professors have different mentoring style. Some labs are very hands-on, some labs are very hands-off. In my case, I've been in the labs that are really hands-off, like you don't really get much direct guidance from your PI as much, but as long as you have that passion and excitement, I think that's really been the driver for me to, you know, go to lab and do work. And I think having that, no matter which environment you end up being in, I think having that excitement will really get you to, you know, the goal that you want to achieve in the end.
Yeah, thanks everyone. I'll really emphasize that sort of environment and wanting to have the mentorship that you want and need. So certainly some PIs are going to be more or less hands-on or hands-off. And if you have a lot of students and postdocs that are senior in the lab and can help you out, a hands-off PI that can be no problem as far as sort of getting feedback and guidance on your project. For me, when I was going to grad school, I wanted a little bit more of an accessible PI. And so that worked well with Ron, and he had a fairly big lab, but liked to be at least somewhat involved in what was going on. And then for my postdoc, I wanted a bit more hands-off experience, and my current lab, the PI is much more hands-off than my former one, which gives me the freedom as a postdoc to kind of set up what I'm doing and run it day to day, and also provide a lot of mentorship to students in the lab. And so I get treated from my PI's perspective as not like an equal, but as somebody that I get a lot of like responsibility and freedom to do what I want, which I enjoy. So yeah, I guess another thing that I can add is that when I was in grad school, I also had a co-advisor, and it was a little bit different than for ICE. And so I think it would just be good to highlight this. And if anybody else had co-advisors too, when I was in grad school, I would get questions from new students all the time about like how to set up co-advising arrangements and how to formalize it and stuff. So I had a co-advisor, Domitilla DeVecchio. She was in the mechanical engineering department, and I was in biological engineering with Ron. And I didn't initially start in her lab. I rotated, joined Ron's lab, and then I took Domitilla's class, met her there, and there was already a collaboration that happened between the labs. And we sort of met because Ron and Domitilla had an idea for a joint project and thought that I would be a good fit for that kind of thing. And so then we met together and discussed, and we ended up having multiple projects together that sort of arose from the sort of long-term collaboration between the labs. I think, I don't even know if I was officially in Domitilla's lab, but what it effectively looks like to you as a student is that you might have both of the PIs at meetings, or you might meet individually with them separately about your project. And you'll probably go to group meetings for both. And so this is an additional time thing, but it also means you'll get exposed to more research, and you'll get more chances for feedback on your project as well. There's also more people that you can connect with. So it can be busier, it can be more overwhelming, but it can also provide you with more sort of a sort of built-in network for you to grow as a grad student and see some different perspectives on your work. Okay. So for the last two questions here, maybe we can roll this together. We've talked a little bit about things in a lab environment that is good to look for. If there's anything else you want to add on to what we've already described, please chime in with that. And in parallel, if there's anything that you wish you knew or was unexpected to you when you got to grad school and actually sort of started getting going on things, what were those unexpected things?
I can hop in with a little bit more on like lab environment stuff that I think I found really important, and that I don't know that I looked for explicitly, but definitely shaped my experience in grad school was, in addition to all the other things we've discussed here, I think you probably want to look at the funding situation for the lab you're going to join. That can have a really big influence, and just generally the resources for the lab. You know, you want to be in a place where you have the resources to do the research you're supposed to be doing. And I had friends who had issues being able to do their work because they didn't have enough money to buy the reagents or whatever it was. And so that is actually a very practical thing to look for when you're looking at joining a lab, and something that can also really shape the culture of a lab, because if you don't have enough resources, it can make it a very different experience as well. And then other things, I already mentioned one of the things that sort of maybe surprised me the most, but maybe it shouldn't have. But again, just to reiterate, I think like the people really had a big impact. It wasn't just like the science or how much work I put in or the program, but the people had a really big impact on my experience.
Yeah, I would like to jump in on the people a little bit more. So like when you join the lab, you're not only going to be working with your PI or anyone in the lab. But you might be working with the collaborators that are working with your team as well. So that could be another important part, that like if you're going to join that lab, you may want to know sooner than later that like you have to work with not just people in your lab, but maybe people in the different institutions, because it could be different kind of like work. How do I say it? Let's say if you collaborate with the national labs, they have the process which is different than the university, and it depends, you may like it or not like it or whatever, but you have to understand that they're different, and you have to like find a common ground and like work together with different collaborators. So I think it depends on like what kind of project you are joining as well. If you really like, feel like it's going to be overwhelming if you're working with another like 5 PIs that is not in your university, because the meeting is going to be a little bit hard to make it happen. That may be something to be considered as well if you're joining a lab that has that kind of like collaborations. But, not to say that like collaboration is bad or anything, but you have to be on top of it, because scheduling things for 5 PIs is not easy. I think everyone agree on that.
I want to kind of add on the collaboration aspect, because this was something that I really haven't thought about for grad schools. But as I participate in different projects, a lot of different funded projects are usually very collaborative. There are multiple co-PIs for many of the NSF, NIH funded projects. And through that experience, I kind of gained the network that I wasn't able to gain from within my lab, but from like outside the lab, and people from similar background and similar interest. So that has become really important factor when I was looking for a postdoc lab, because I really gained a lot of insights and valuable network from the collaborations. But that wasn't really what I was looking at for the lab environment when I was searching for it. I was just looking for more hands-off environment, so that I can do more independent research and not really micromanaged on every little details. But I've also seen a lot of people, at least in my lab, that were struggling because of the lack of guidance, especially people who don't have much background in this field of like molecular biology and in general. So I think making that decision, you gotta think about yourself and how you really prosper in terms of like what kind of environment that you prefer, and that I think that is, I guess, really important. That really determines your career in the grad school. And then the things that I didn't expect during my PhD was obviously my advisor moving to a different school. So my advisor relocated to a different school during my PhD, and that was obviously unexpected, and wasn't happy about it at all. But managed to continue to work with them and finish my research with them, mainly because I really like the research, and regardless of all the hardships like COVID and all the other things that happened during the PhD, I was able to basically get over it with the interest and excitement with my research. And I think similar things apply to your work style, whether you prefer hands-on or hands-off. As long as you're really interested in the stuff that you're doing, I think you can kind of adapt to the environment as well. So yeah, I think that's been the common theme of my my thoughts on grad schools and research.
All right. If you guys have any more thoughts, say now, or we can go into the Q&A, and then if there's anything that comes up that you think of, you're welcome to share more. Okay, so we'll just open it up. to the people in the audience. So if you have a question, feel free to open your mic and ask, or post it into the chat, and then we'll answer it out loud. We'll give it a few minutes or we'll go ahead and open it up. If nobody answers a question right away, I'll go to some of the questions that were answered in the form for the registrations. Okay, so Sarah asked, how can you gain insight into the funding status of labs you're interested in? So yes, one of us mentioned this. We follow up on it a little bit.
Sure, I think, I mean, I guess I don't know the best way to go about it. You can ask one, I mean, I think you can ask about what grants they have and you know, how many students the grants support and how many students they're looking to take a given year. It's also a good idea to ask the students of the lab as well. Like you'll be able to be a little bit more, the interaction with the students in the lab might feel a little bit less high pressure than with a PI, at least when you're first meeting people. And so you can also ask the students, like, do they feel like they have the resources to do their research and that kind of thing. So I think it's actually pretty straightforward to just ask, do you have the resources to do the research that you're supposed to be doing?
To quickly chime in for funding, I've actually seen quite a few cases where even if the PI doesn't have a funding, the department kind of supports the first couple of years of the funding for the student. If the student really wants to join that PI, and if the PI is willing to apply for funding within the next few years. So I don't think it's like a hard, no, even if the funding is not available, as long as you can really persuade the PI that you're interested in. I think there's an option there too.
I will also add, we didn't really talk about fellowships at all yet, but that's something that I would highly recommend you do, sort of no matter what your situation is. It's a great experience to apply for them no matter what, even if you don't get it. And if you do get it, you have external funding that will essentially support your salary, which I think it essentially lets you join the lab you want to join. That's not a 100% guarantee, but in most cases that I've seen, having external funding allows you to sort of join whichever lab you'd like. And the process of applying really helps you hone your research and think about the types of problems you'd like to work on and potentially interact with a PI that you're interested in working for. When I applied to fellowships, it was my first time actually getting to work with my future advisor. And so we, sat down and wrote out potential projects and I got feedback from him about the application. So that's the type of thing that's really helpful as well. It's not exactly related to how you can figure out funding status for a lab, but it is related.
One thing I want to add to that is, if the PI has got a big funding, there might be some news about it. So if you Google that PI that you want to work with and that thing show up that that person just got a grant like 1 or 2 years ago, that funding is probably still active. So that's one thing, but it's harder to see who doesn't have grant, right? It's a lot easier to see who has one. And most of the time, like if you decided to apply to the program and reach out to some students or some like grad program advisor, like they can be honest with you because they're not actually in the lab. They're not trying to actively recruit anyone into any specific lab. They're in charge of trying to recruit you into the program. So I would say the grad program advisor is another contact that might be useful in terms of like discuss about grants and things.
Yeah, these are all great points. Something I'd add is that when you're thinking about choosing a program, if it's the sort of program where you're not necessarily directly admitted to a lab, in which case you can sort of sometimes arrange these sorts of things in advance. But if you're going to go in and you're going to do rotations or something, and you're not really sure where you're going to end up, it could be helpful to think about how many possible labs are there for you to work at a given institute. So like one place where you only like one lab and you might like them a lot could be a little bit risky, because if suddenly they don't have funding when you get there, or there's 3 other people that also want to join that lab, there can be some issues. So I generally, like all else equal, I would generally go for a place where there's more choice for you, because then you're sort of protected a bit. You're more robust to these differences in funding and the number of students that might want to join a given lab. Now, like for me, I was in a program that did rotations, and it worked out to where people in my year basically found the labs that they wanted, and there wasn't much conflict. But the year after me, there's a bunch of people that wanted to join one lab, and not all of them were happy about how it ended up working itself out. So just be a little bit wary of things like that. It can be hard to know upfront sort of what everybody else's plans are, but you can try to set yourself up to be a little bit more have more options, I guess. And you're certainly welcome, like once you've done the interviews and stuff, to reach out and ask questions like, how many students do you expect to take, and get connected to students in the lab. I saw a question in the chat about, in addition to reaching out to potential PIs, what about reaching out to the students in the lab? I would say sort of before you're applying to grad school, if you reach out to a student, you might not get them reaching back to you. The PI might not either, but at least if you email the PI and say, hey, I'm interested in the lab and applying to your program or whatever, could you put me in contact with a student in your lab that works on this kind of stuff? I think that is probably the most likely way that you'll actually be able to talk to somebody before you apply. Once you've like done an interview at a school or something like that, once you're going to that, then they're going to be a lot more available to talk to you about potentially joining the lab. And so then you'll have an easier time reaching out directly to grad students in the lab or postdocs or whatever, and asking them about the lab and things like that. So if you're sort of deciding right now which school to go to, or if I go to a school, like which labs, if you've already done the interviews, you can certainly reach out to students, especially if you met them on the interviews, and say, hey, met you before, can I ask you some more questions? Most grad students will be happy to follow up.
So one minor point to add on that, I just came from the conference yesterday, and I see a lot of undergrads attending conference as well. So if you happen to see anyone from the school that you want to apply to at the conference, and you reach out, you talk with them, that person know that you are trying to apply to grad school in the next round, and the school that you are, that person came from is like one of your choice. I think that's going to be a lot easier to reach out, or like have them help connect with the lab that you might be interested in, because it's a lot easier to like have someone that you have met in person to help connect with the other people that that you don't know that the email is just someone you don't really know, or it could be potential spam or something like that. I feel like that's a much better approach, to have someone like that's maybe not a PI but a student from the lab close by introduce you to the people in the lab.
So I don't see a question in the chat, but I'll ask a question that was from the forum. And we touched a little bit before on maybe some of the other aspects of what a grad program can offer for your professional development, but I don't think we went into any detail on this. So what kind of things are there, like clubs and fellowship offices, training grants, and et cetera, at grad programs that maybe a student should be aware of?
I have a lot of thoughts about this, because it was something that drew me to Northwestern. There's a lot of opportunities there. So One of the things that I participated in was we TA'd as graduate students, but also there was a program called the Teaching Assistant Program where you could actually apply to the program and you co-teach a course. You know, TAing is very different than actually teaching a course usually. And so I did this during my PhD, and it was something that as a potential, you know, someone who's interested in becoming a professor, it's a great experience to actually teach a course. So I worked with a professor to prepare all of the materials. I wrote the homeworks, I wrote the exams, I gave half the lectures, I did all of that with the support of another faculty member who teaches that course regularly. So that was a really great experience to sort of try out that. And there was tons of other things sort of like that at Northwestern that I really liked. So for example, there was a program if you were interested in entrepreneurship, where there was sort of a summer program where you'd go and you take sort of a couple of sort of condensed courses on entrepreneurship and work with people at the business school to try and like imagine what a company could look like in a, you know, you come up with a company idea. There was tons of other teaching resources, all sorts of other stuff. There's lots of like community engagement and sort of like STEAM outreach kind of things. Lots of different things like that. You can see if the program is supportive of students doing internships. I think in general, most programs are, but that's another great way for to gain more professional development during your PhD, is to go check out what it's like to do research at a company and take a break from your own PhD work. And so I think there's a lot of really interesting opportunities. So really digging into what different programs have there, I think can add a lot to your PhD experience beyond just doing research in the lab or on the computer.
As a part of EBRC, I would like to bring up some really great programs that EBRC offers. One, I think I can think of two immediately: mentor-mentee program, where you can actually have a mentor from national labs or industry to really connect you one-on-one meeting every month to get, you know, every kinds of insights. I was part of it a couple of years ago, and that was been really exciting. I got so much information and help from my mentor. And the other is the internship program, the industry internship program, which I think has been really, I've never had a chance to do an internship through EBRC, but they're fascinating companies that offers internship through EBRC. And I think that's very kind of streamlined ways to apply for internship through like a specific platform. And the other thing that I wanted to mention that I really valued a lot during my PhD is going into different conferences. So there are also other organizations, not just EBRC, but specific organization that you or your group is probably part of. And it wouldn't hurt to ask your professor that you want to present your work at the conference. And you know, presenting your work is obviously a very important thing for conference, but the network and people that you meet through that experience really helped me a lot in shaping my career. So I would say if you have a chance, go to conferences, and that would be really life-changing experiences.
Yeah, I want to add into that a little bit. So each programs may have like different supports that, you know, can help you seek out some opportunities that might be available for you. So for example, what Alan mentioned about a conference is that like sometimes you want to go to the conference and present your work, you may have to, you know, allocate some money from the grant that your PI is managing so that have some student go and present the work. There are also some other opportunities because like some of the big conference may provide some travel grants that you can apply to, and the eligibility may be different depending on what program it is. I think I used to get one travel grant to ACS, like American Chemical Society conference, which is a very big one. And like, you know, I go there without having to present anything. I mean, you are welcome to present if you have some work that you want to share, but I was sort of like trying to explore the field. Is actually my first in-person conference ever because of COVID. So that was like pretty good And like if you have the support that is not from your lab, then it's a lot easier to convince your PI that like, hey, I'll be out for a week. You don't really have to pay anything. I'm gonna go there, learn, connect, and I'll come back with more insights and gonna do a better work in what you're doing. And they'll be happy to support you in this kind of thing. And they'll be happy that you were able to find additional support from outside as well, because that's something that you should be growing as a scientist or in PhD career.
Cool, thanks, guys. I'll add on a couple of things that I'm not sure how prevalent these are at different institutes and programs, but are a few things that we had in our program. So one was a communication lab. So this was, there was a staff member that was sort of in charge of it, and they recruited students from the program that would then be trained to help out other students with their fellowship applications, presentations, papers, thesis proposals, whatever. And we're a really nice resource, both for you to gain skills as like somebody that would want to be a mentor or like a comm lab, basically like, I forget what they call, but basically on that side of it, or to just use those resources as somebody that wanted to, you know, improve your presentations or whatever it is. So tools like that can be very helpful. There was a program called REFS, which was a group of people in the department that you could go and talk to help with conflict resolution, especially with respect to conflicts between you and your PI. And they could help you work through some of these things and then come up with plans to deal with it. Some people also just kind of would regularly meet with refs to just talk about how things are going and, you know, keep up to date. So it didn't have to be resolving any particular conflict. They could also just be there to help, you know, relieve some stress or help you out in general. A lot of, maybe most, I'm not sure, programs will have some kind of a grad board where the students in the program will have various activities, programs, et cetera, that they put together, kind of similar to the EBRC board, which some of us are a part of. And so some of those activities are mostly just things to support department activities, but some of them might also engage with the department leadership to talk about like grad stipends and things like that. So a well-represented and powerful grad board could be a good benefit for you and the sort of development of your program. And part of that depends on the resources that the department has in terms of what such a grad board could do. But yeah, they can be quite nice. And finally, some schools will have sort of fun or peripheral class type things that are available. So for example, at MIT, there's this independent activities period during January where there's a bunch of short classes, some of them a week long, some of them a few weeks long. And they can be on all kinds of different topics. So for example, one year I took a short week-long class on science funding and science policy. And it sort of introduced people to like, what are the federal funding structures for science? How do they work? What is the history of how they came about? What does the future look like? And if you were interested in that, you could sort of get involved in the science policy initiative at MIT, which has some analogs at other schools as well. And it was like a club that met monthly, but they also put together a trip to Washington, DC to go advocate for science. So there's things like that where you can find clubs on campus that do some of these like science policy or maybe things related to like, I don't know, patent law or something. Like there's always like some ability to like check out some of these clubs that have specific interests that might not be, you know, like wet lab science, but are related to science careers. And so those can provide opportunities for you to go into non-research careers after your grad school as well. So just some things to keep an eye out for as you're looking at different programs. Okay, does anybody have any final comments before we go? Closing thoughts, something you haven't got to say yet, but you've been mulling over?
Good luck.
Awesome, thanks. Cool. So thanks everyone for coming. And I guess we'll call it there. So thanks to our panelists for joining today and giving all of their sage feedback to the audience. Thanks to the audience for coming, and to those of you watching on YouTube. This will be posted on YouTube hopefully soon. We just have to send it to our people at EBRC and then have them process it for us. But hopefully we'll be up in time for people that will be making decisions on some of these things soon. So this has been another production of the Engineering Biology Research Consortium's Student and Postdoc Association. For more information about EBRC, visit our website at ebrc.org. If you're a graduate student or postdoc and you want to get involved in the Student and Postdoc Association, you can find our membership application on the website. So that includes current master's students. Even if you're applying to a PhD program, you can join right now. YouTube will include a link to the website. So big thank you to the rest of the EBRC SPA outreach team, of which this is a part of our various outreach activities. So ICE, who's here today, Kelsey Gray, Yan Zhang, and Koxi Lee, along with many others that have helped us out in our efforts, including panelists here today. And finally, thanks to EBRC for their support for all of our activities, and to those that have attended and participated in our many outreach initiatives. And we look forward to having some events for all of you soon. So keep your eye out for the next panel or workshop. There should be one coming soon. So we will send out emails and such for all those that sign up for emails. So keep your eyes out. All right, and thanks again, everyone. And we'll end it there.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.